Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast. My name is Stuart Teicher. I'm back on schedule for release dates of these stories. I'll be returning to releasing new episodes on the 1st and 15th of every month. I must tell you that I will not be switching that around anymore, ever again. I thought it would be easier to mess around with stuff while I graded my law school papers. I moved the dates that I released some of the episodes, and that was a huge mistake. It's much easier just to stick to the schedule, buckle down, get the story done, and stick to the schedule. So that's what I'm going to do going forward. But since I just did an episode last week, this one I think is going to end up being slightly on the shorter side, but I still think it's a good story. I also want to mention a bit of a theme that I think I'm going to have running through some of these stories going forward. I started to think that maybe these stories can serve two purposes. First, I hope they entertain you. I think we all need some escape from our lives, and hopefully these stories can provide that. But I also was thinking recently that these stories can help all of us learn about certain dangers in life that I think we all deal with, and I think they could provide a little bit of guidance about how we can all stay safe. The story in this week's episode of the podcast is perfect in that regard. When I teach ethics lessons to lawyers, and that's how I make my living as an ethics CLE speaker. If you want to bring me out for an ethics program, you can find my speaking information at stuartteicher.com. When I teach ethics lessons to lawyers, I explain that there are often 4 reasons for lawyer bad behavior. And when you think about it, they're not really restricted to lawyers. I call them the 4 horsemen of the mental apocalypse. Now, I need to tell you something about the name, the 4 horsemen. I thought that was a football thing. I mean, it is a football thing. There was a crew of running backs from Notre Dame in the 1920s known as the 4 Horsemen. Apparently, they were given that nickname after they beat an army team in an impressive manner. But I didn't know that the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse was actually a Bible thing. It seems that it comes from the book of Revelations. I didn't know that because I'm Jewish, and when we read the Bible, they never had us look at the sequel. So, yeah. The 4 horsemen of the mental apocalypse for all professionals are desperation, temptation, pressurization, and appreciation. Sometimes we make bad decisions because we're desperate. Sometimes it's because we're tempted and it just seems so easy to do it. Other times we feel immense pressure. And finally, sometimes we just don't appreciate the bad decision we're about to make. Now, there's one more element I've always wanted to add, but I haven't, and it's mental health issues. I think that pushes us to make a lot of bad decisions as well. There are 2 reasons that I didn't add mental health as part of the 4 horsemen. First, it's because then there wouldn't be 4, and I couldn't use the whole 4 horsemen idea. I mean, I could have gone to 5 and used the Fab 5 as a reference, but then I'd upset all of my friends who went to Ohio State. Yeah, you see, the Fab 5 refers to a successful college basketball team from the 1990s from a school whose name cannot be mentioned in the presence of Ohio State people. Okay, Buckeyes, close your ears. I'm going to say the name of the school, but I don't want to upset you, so before I utter the name that shall not be mentioned, I'm going to say now. And when you hear that, put your fingers in your ears, count to 2, and then release them. Ready? Now. It's Michigan. Okay, you're safe now. You think it's a joke that I have to do that, but I said the M word once in Columbus, Ohio when I was speaking there. There were chairs thrown across the room. It was a whole thing, and I don't want to upset anybody ever again. The other reason I couldn't add mental health to the list is because I couldn't find a word that rhymes with the other 4 horsemen. Desperation, temptation, pressurization, and appreciation. I couldn't find a word that ends in ation and works for mental health. I mean, I could have made up one using the ment prefix for mental health, but then it would have been desperation, temptation, pressurization, appreciation, and menstruation, and I just didn't think that worked. Truth is, leaving the 4 horsemen as just 4 really does make sense because mental health fits into the appreciation element. When I talk about failing to appreciate dangers, I mean that we're not aware of the dangers. Sometimes that lack of awareness is because we're not paying attention and we're disengaged. Other times the lack of awareness is because we're affected by mental health issues, so I think it does work. Anyway, I'm going to thread the 4 horsemen of the mental apocalypse throughout my programs because I think they're relevant to these stories and I think they can help a lot of people stay out of trouble. In today's story, the issue the lawyer deals with is pressurization. Now, this lawyer didn't commit true lawyer crime, and she wasn't really engaging in true lawyer slime, but she was in a true lawyer bind and ended up getting bit hard in her true lawyer behind. Remember to please subscribe to the podcast so you get the episodes downloaded as soon as they're released, and rate us, and please leave a review on whatever podcast platform you use. Thanks so much, and enjoy this episode, Crushed by the Caseload. If you think the 2008 financial crisis is bad, then you didn't live through the 1993 recession. For me, that was a crap ton worse. It was the year I got out of law school, and it was a bloodbath in the practice of law. There were no jobs. I mean, like none. I started to feel it when I was looking for a summer job between my second and third year of law school. I worked for a small firm in South Jersey that was made up of the founding lawyer and his son. You know, the guy who started the firm originally, and then his son came to work with him. It was a two-person firm. I was expected to do some research and writing stuff, the kind of typical work that a law student would do. I interviewed with the son, and it went great. I got the gig, and I was excited about starting my first job in the practice of law. I had no idea I was walking into a firestorm. The day I started, the father and son got into a massive screaming match. I never heard two people yell at each other so much in my entire life. It was incredible. What I didn't know is that this was not the first time they argued. You see, at my interview, they didn't tell me that this two-person firm was until very recently a three-person firm. The law firm used to be the founding lawyer, his son, and the son's wife. The week before I started, however, the wife quit. And every day of my first week of work, the father and son engaged in the loudest screaming matches I have ever heard to this day. I would sit in the conference room working while the two of them shouted at each other. The louder it got, the deeper I tried to bury my face in the books. I felt like a kid whose parents were on the brink of a divorce. And then, one day during that first week, the screaming abruptly stopped. I heard the door to the office slam super hard, and I never saw the sun again. For the rest of the summer, it was just me and the old man. And it became readily apparent to me that it was the son who wanted to hire a summer associate because the father had absolutely no desire to work with me whatsoever. I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I knew how to research. I learned that in law school, but I didn't know anything else. And every time I had a question, my reluctant boss had no desire to give me any guidance. I remember once he told me, "Listen, stop peppering me with questions so often. Take a legal pad and write down your questions on it throughout the day. Then come see me at the end of the day and I'll answer them all." And then he conveniently found a way to leave the office shortly before the end of the day, like every day. By the end of the summer, I had a legal pad full of unanswered questions. It didn't get any better in my first job out of law school. By that time, the recession was in full bloom. Graduating law students were taking whatever job we could find, even if it meant being a paralegal. The only job I could find was with a one-man shop. The guy had a ton of work, he didn't have enough time to do it, and he had even less money available to pay a qualified associate to help him out. So he hired me instead. And he paid me crap. Every single person in the office was making more than me. Every single person. I could have quit my job, worked for the office cleaning crew, and taken home more money. If you actually did the math after considering how many hours I worked, I don't even think I was making minimum wage. But it was the only job in the law that I could get, so I took it. He threw me into the fire immediately. I swear to you this is true. I was sworn into the bar on December 22nd, 1993, and I was in court for my first time on December 23rd. It was a divorce case that was eventually going to trial, and my boss told me that all he needed me to do was to go to court and to get an adjournment. So first, I did what you'd expect. I looked up, what is an adjournment? Okay, Turns out I'm just asking for the matter to be rescheduled. Hey, I could probably pull that off. I drove 2 hours up to Flemington, New Jersey. The courtroom was in the historic Hunterdon County Courthouse, which happens to be the same, not only courthouse, but the same courtroom where they held the famous Lindbergh baby kidnapping trial. Today, it's just a historical building that's used for display purposes, but back then it was still a functioning courthouse, and that courtroom was where the Hunterdon County Family Court held its business. So I get to the courtroom and I'm told to sit in one of the counsel tables. There are 2 tables in front of this very imposing judge's bench. The judge walks in, Rusty the bailiff says, "All rise," and I crap my pants. Just the sight of all of it. Immediately. We get up, the judge comes in, tells everyone to be seated. I'm still crapping my pants. We all sit down. The judge looks down from the bench, looks at me, and looks at my adversary sitting at the other counsel table and says, "Counsel, make your appearance." And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? I look at the other guy. He stands up and says, "Good morning, Your Honor. Robert Jones appearing on behalf of the plaintiff." I said, okay, that I can do. Judge looks at me and I stand up, wobbly knees and all. "Good morning, Your Honor. I'm Stuart Teicher and I represent the defendant," and I sit down. I'm doing good so far. I'm thinking at this point, everything's going well. All I got to do now is ask for this adjournment and get the hell out of here. And that's when the judge looks at us and says, "Okay, let's get started with this trial. Mr. Jones, let's have your opening statement." The next few minutes were a blur. I have only vague recollections of what happened. I remember standing up. I remember stammering. I remember there was weeping. And then I sort of remember blacking out. When I came to, I was sitting in the judge's chambers along with the other lawyer, and I was being yelled at. The judge must have realized that I had no idea what I was doing, and he must have figured out what my boss was up to. My boss probably didn't have the ability to adjourn the trial, but he needed one because he wasn't prepared to try the case yet. So he set me up. He sent me to court because he knew the judge would never let me try the case, given that I was a lawyer who was licensed for all of 16 hours. He'd have to adjourn the case. The last thing I remember is the judge screaming at me, "Tell your boss the next time this is scheduled, this case is going to trial, and he should not send you." This was my entire first couple of years of the practice, getting thrown into situations where I had to figure out what was going on for myself. Now, for those of you who are not lawyers, let me tell you what's going on right now. Throughout the Good Lawyers Gone Bad listening audience, there are a truckload of other listeners who are lawyers that are all screaming at their phones or computers right now saying, the same thing happened to me. That's because it happens far more often than anyone in the law wants to admit. But I doubt that many lawyers who had similar experiences ended up doing what Carla Ukel did. Carla was put in a similar situation, but she dealt with it in a way that got her into a host of trouble. Carla Ukel was admitted to the Kansas bar in 2011, and she got a job at a small firm right out of law school. Incidentally, I feel so bad for Carla that I didn't even use her real name here. Carla Ukel is an anagram of the real person's name. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't feel so bad for her. You listen to the story and you make the call. Carla was thrown into the fire like a lot of lawyers who work for small firms. She got a large caseload of work. She handled matters in municipal court. She assisted other members of the firm with insurance defense litigation. She basically did general litigation kind of stuff. And it seems that the firm was appointed as prosecutor in a nearby city, so she split the prosecuting duties with another associate in the firm. And much like my experiences and many other lawyers, Carla had very little supervision. Sure, she had people that she answered to at the firm, but there was no real assistance coming her way. There was no lawyer that could actually teach her how to do her job. She was a first-year associate, which means she didn't know anything about actual lawyering. Carla probably learned how to do her job like the rest of us, from her secretary. Oh yeah, I learned a lot about the law in law school, but I learned how to be a lawyer from my first secretary. Her name was Marion, and she was 75 years old when I started working for her. Yes, I meant to say it that way. Marion was a special woman. She had 14 children. I think her uterus was made out of spandex. Marion taught me the ins and outs of the practice of law, and I learned the rest on the job. That seems to be how Carla Uckel learned it as well. For 3 years, Carla basically hunted and pecked her way through the practice of law. Her professional life was like a big circus act. She had to juggle all these cases they threw her way, and she hoped that if she made some mistakes, the mistakes weren't too bad. Some of the matters were pretty easy, and she was able to learn on the fly. Early in her career, for instance, she represented someone in a collection matter. The client was owed money from someone, so Carla figured out what to do. She filed a complaint against the person who owed the money. That guy didn't answer the complaint, so Carla was able to get a judgment as well as an order to garnish their wages. The client was pleased. But she had to do that without any guidance. She had a heavy caseload. She had a private life. She had every pressure that's part of the practice of law. And all of that ends up taking an emotional toll on a young lawyer. And it's kind of strange because under those circumstances, you don't have imposter syndrome. You are an actual imposter. And you know it. You know you don't know what you're doing. You know there's no cavalry coming to help you. And you feel terrible about it. You have clients who need your help and you want to help them. You have bosses who expect you to rise to the occasion and you want to do that. You have a family at home who expects you to bring home the bacon and you feel responsible to do so. But you have no idea about whether you can actually accomplish those things because you don't know what you're doing. And if you're a person like Carla Uckel who also happens to be suffering with depression and anxiety, it makes for a dangerous situation. But Carla did her best to keep all those balls in the air. And that got even tougher when you considered where she was in her personal life. Carla was in a romantic relationship that was getting more serious by the day. And in 2015, all of that juggle would come to a frenzied peak because it was the year that she decided to get married. Do they still print bridal magazines? Do they still print anything in magazine form these days? I would think that bridal magazines still get printed. That's what people do when they decide to get married, right? They run out and buy a bunch of magazines and they get to work planning the special day. I mean, that's what they did back in my day, at least. Of course, that's also when people figure out that getting married can be a chore. Planning a wedding is an effort. You've got to hire all the vendors, you got to decide who's going to be invited, and then you have to navigate family politics and finances. It is a handful, and it causes strife even under the best of circumstances. Now, try doing that while juggling a full docket as a lawyer. Carla asked her bosses if she could take some time off to get it all done, but they turned her down. Still, some of you are thinking, I can imagine that. I had a full-time demanding job and I planned a wedding just fine. Well, that's what Carla Uckel was probably thinking too. And she probably felt pretty confident about handling it all. Until the other associate in her office quit. You know what that means, right? All of the cases that the other associate was handling were now Carla's cases. So now, in addition to planning her wedding, Carla's caseload at work just doubled. Oh, and that meant her work as a prosecutor got more hectic too. The other associate who quit was the person handling the rest of the prosecutorial duties. So now Carla had to assume their responsibility for everything, which meant more court sessions with heavy dockets. The sessions lasted for hours. There were several each week, and there were some night court sessions too. Carla must have felt like Biff Tanner in Back to the Future. A whole truckload of manure just got dumped on top of her. In addition to the sheer volume of work thrown at her, Carla had another problem. All of the matters that the associate dealt with and were now her responsibility, all of those matters were family law cases. But Carla had never done a family law case. And the partner she answered to at the firm also didn't know anything about family law. The pressure on Carla was immense. And oh yeah, I mentioned she was getting married too. The week of her wedding was what I call a lawyer special. She worked. She didn't take any time off the week of her wedding. She took a very short honeymoon and she was back at her desk in a flash. Now, Carla asked for help. The firm assigned some lawyers who could act as mentors, but those lawyers were far too busy with their own caseload and they were never able to give Carla any real guidance. The meetings she scheduled with them usually ended up being canceled, and Carla was left with a legal pad full of questions and no one to provide answers. In 2017, things got ratcheted up a couple of notches. First, Carla was dealing with angry clients. Her caseload was simply too big, and she couldn't get the work done in a timely manner. That was causing delays, and the clients were getting pissed. Who hasn't been there before with a lawyer, right? For instance, the client from that collection matter she worked on a few years ago, he was a perfect example. He was angry because Carla still hadn't actually collected the money that was supposed to be garnished. She had another case in a similar situation. It was a landlord-tenant client, and he was angry too. He wanted a deadbeat tenant evicted, and it was taking Carla forever to get the job done. Carla surely took an apologetic tone with these guys and all of her clients. For instance, she told the landlord-tenant client, "Listen, I filed the eviction petition and I appeared in court on your behalf." She must have explained that the wheels of justice unfortunately move slowly and there isn't always much a lawyer can do to speed up the process. Maybe Carla was a little full of it, you know? A little more diligence might have helped, but she surely didn't have either the time or the strength to make the extra effort on her client's behalf. After all, she was now expecting her first child. Carla hoped to reduce her caseload while she was expecting, but that didn't happen either. In fact, very much to the contrary, there was a shitstorm. One of the partners in her firm came down with an unexpected health issue. So you know what that meant, right? They transferred all of that partner's files to Carla. And if that wasn't enough, both her litigation paralegal and her family law paralegal, they both had family issues and they both took time off at the same time. So now, not only did Carla have more legal files to deal with, but she had no one to help her with the administrative work, so she had to do absolutely everything by herself. Carla knew that she was in over her head. She felt it from the clients. Some clients were sending emails asking for updates on their cases, and she was flat out ignoring them. With other clients, she was dragging her feet on their matters. Carla struggled to get organized, but her career was a mess. Files were everywhere, papers were everywhere, notes were everywhere. It overwhelmed her so much that sometimes she would just sit at her office desk, stare at the piles of paper, and just be paralyzed. Yeah, for Carla Uckel, things were getting intense rapidly. Pressure causes people to do things they never thought they would do. Things that, in the absence of that pressure, seem ludicrous. But when the pressurization hits, people change. In Carla Uckel's case, that became evident with one of her criminal clients. The client called Carla to find out what was happening, and Carla surely dealt with that file like she did with all of the other files she had. She probably avoided the client's calls. She hadn't done any work on the client's matter, and she didn't want to tell that to the client. Your fire just isn't burning hot enough right now. I got to deal with somebody else first. She didn't want to say that to the client. Eventually, however, she could no longer run away from it. And when the client called to find out whether the expungement paperwork was filed, Carla told him, yes, it was filed. Lying the first time is always the toughest. Unfortunately, it gets easier after that. Carla Uckel figured that out quickly. She didn't have much of a problem lying to her clients after that. She had a client pursuing a name change case. When the client called to ask about the status, Carla told him the case was filed. It wasn't. Yeah, once the ball got rolling, the lies came more often. Eventually, some of the clients had enough. Carla's landlord-tenant client, remember that case we talked about earlier? He complained to his senior partner that the deadbeat tenant was still not out. The partner must have been surprised. Carla was working that file, and as far as the firm could tell, it was moving along properly. But the complaint motivated that partner to start looking through Carla's files, and when the partner reviewed that landlord-tenant matter, he found something strange. Carla claimed that she was in court at a hearing regarding the eviction matter. But her billing records showed that at the time of that hearing, she was in court on a mediation matter for a different client. The attorney was puzzled. She couldn't be in two places at the same time. Maybe it was a mistake in the bills. Maybe Carla simply made a typo on the dates. But then the lawyer noticed something else. He looked closer at the eviction order. Some numbers didn't match. The docket number on the date stamp that the court affixed to the petition when it was filed didn't match the docket number of the actual case. The partner knew that he was going to have to look into this further, but he wasn't prepared for what he would find. When the partner confronted Carla, she must have known that the lies were now going to be revealed. It must have been a moment she both dreaded and hoped for in the same strange way. You can imagine how the interaction must have gone. Carla must have known she was caught, and she must have broke down, sobbing, trying to get the truth out while attempting to catch her breath. She was certainly mortified, but to a certain extent she was probably relieved. She could finally tell people about the fact that her caseload was in shambles. She could finally come clean and get the weight off her back. She admitted it. Yes, I didn't return calls. Yes, I lied about whether documents were filed. Yes, I didn't appear at court hearings. Yes, I told clients that those things were done when they weren't. And yes, I lied about all of that to all the lawyers in the firm as well. The lawyers in the firm had no idea about any of this. They were certainly horrified, and they were probably very scared. They must have immediately had visions of malpractice cases dancing in their heads. And they must have felt sick to their stomach when Carla told them what else she did. A good example is one of her family law clients. Carla had a client that needed her to file a post-divorce petition. In that case, Carla needed to make an appearance at court and file documents called interrogatories. When the client called and asked Carla for an update, Carla told the client that she appeared in court and she filed the interrogatories. Of course, she had done neither. But Carla knew that eventually someone was going to start asking questions. Eventually, somebody was going to look in the files and realize that the work wasn't getting done. Carla flipped through the client's file. It was basically empty. There was no evidence of any work being done because no work was being done. So Carla did what pyramid schemers and fraudsters of all kinds have been doing for generations. She tried to cover up her fraud. Carla walked to the file cabinet and pulled out another client's file. She removed that other client's filed interrogatories. She went to the photocopier and returned back to her desk with the copies of the filed interrogatories and a pair of scissors. She cut out the filing stamp from the second client's file. She pasted that filing stamp onto the unfiled interrogatories from the first client's file. She re-photocopied those documents so you couldn't tell that they were cut and pasted, and she put the doctored interrogatories into the file. Her supervisors, when they found out about this, were surely in shock. They grilled Carla on the other matters she was handling. They would then find out that this was not the first time she made such a move. She reminded them about that eviction matter she worked on. They asked her, "Did you lie about that too?" The only reply she could give was yes. In that eviction matter, Carla never even filed the case against the deadbeat tenant. She never appeared in court. She never filed the judgment. And the reason there was a discrepancy in the docket numbers on the documents in the file was because she cut the filing stamp off another pleading in somebody else's file and pasted it onto the unfiled document from the eviction case. The partners shook their heads. They knew what it all meant. They would be preoccupied for years dealing with clients whose cases had been ruined, years of addressing all of this with the disciplinary authorities. It was a mess. They asked Carla if there was anything else. Were there any other files with problems? Her response was cryptic and scary. She said the eviction case was the worst one. I'm not so sure the other lawyers agreed after they reviewed what Carla had done on that collection matter. The documents in that file were marked as stamped, but they were also cut and paste jobs. And there was an additional problem in that file. The signature of the judges on those documents were forged by Carla Uckel. Shortly thereafter, one of Carla's clients filed a disciplinary complaint against her. Both Carla and the law firm cooperated with the disciplinary investigations, and all of Carla's bad deeds were revealed. They learned that in multiple cases she never filed the clients' cases and lied to them about it. She told clients she went to court on their behalf when she had never actually done so. She told clients that she obtained judgments on their behalf but had done no such thing. She faked court filings, forged documents, and forged judges' signatures. And it affected dozens of client files. Pressurization. That's what led to the downfall of Carla Uckel. Intense pressure causes people to feel like they're backed into a corner and, like Ariana Grande said, they make bad decisions. In Carla Uckel's case, the court sort of acknowledged the role that pressure played when they decided her fate. They explained that the evidence painted a picture of an associate attorney whose poor judgment appeared to have been triggered by her overwhelming workload, lack of direct supervision, and her depression. They suspended her from the practice of law for 2 years. One day we'll talk about how the courts give what appears to be light sentences to lawyers for some pretty bad behavior, right? We'll discuss that sometime in the future, but for now, we're just going to have to accept the judge's decision. In Carla Uckel's case, there was a moment when she took a particular step that would change everything. She went from simply lying to trying to cover things up. And that is what we'll be talking about in the next episode of the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast. One of the biggest cover-ups in American history and the very criminal role that many sophisticated lawyers played in this scandal. Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.